I now call our meeting to order. We begin today by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Woolastock Whig. These territories are covered by treaties of peace and friendship of the Woolastock Whig people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. Attendance has been taken. Yes. Approval of the agenda.
Bob Powell, Michael. I'll second it. Bob Powell, Michael.
Any discussion? Ready for the question? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Are there any conflict of interest for disclosure this evening? Approve of the minutes, September 7th, 2023. Any discussion? Ready for the question? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Move now to number 6, the budget information review question answer. And I will now turn the floor over to our CEO, John Smith, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kevin's got a little presentation. It's only a few slides. Don't worry, it won't be long. In terms of what has been happening. Just to walk everyone through, I just want to reconfirm to all the directors present, which is our full board, that, you know, when we're doing these budgets and we're doing this work and when we're working, we are working for you. We're the team that supports the Capital Region Service Commission, and we work for you. Whatever direction is provided, that's what we will implement. We may sometimes, you know, debate a little or question a little or ask a little or maybe ask too many questions, but we're only doing it to ensure that we're giving you the best possible service at all times. I just wanted you to know that, you know, there had been, I did receive a couple of questions, primarily from those that were fairly new. And this year's draft budget followed the identical process as in previous years. So we've not changed any of the process. We bring it to the finance, we do a draft budget, bring it to the finance committee. Finance committee says yay or nay. We go back to the finance committee if necessary, and then we bring it to the board. And so we follow that same process year after year. So we want you to understand that this year, again, we followed the identical processes in previous years. Budget 2024 and subsequent years, the Regional Service Support Fund, many were asking, how long is that good for? Is it a few years? This is the 50-50 investment that Mary Kay talked about, 1.46 million this year, or 469 million. And there's now a full process and formula, and it's actually it's in regulation under the Community Funding Act. So it's going to take a will of government to try to change that. It's meant to be put there so that it's there continuing and that the communities can see that this is an ongoing effort. This isn't something that ends in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. This is ongoing now moving forward. And what we really want to achieve for you and for the communities that you represent is stable and predictable funding. And so that's what we're trying to achieve in our budgeting process, and that everybody understands where that is and what it looks like moving forward. And there'll always be questions, there'll always be answers. And, you know, sometimes we like the answers, sometimes we don't. So we're going to work through that. So tonight, our Chief Operating Officer, Don Fitzgerald, will walk us through the technical process moving forward, because we did receive an amendment that was shared with everybody. And Don's going to walk us through the process moving forward and what that will look like. Following that, Mary Kay Langton, our Chief Financial Officer, will walk us through the proposed budget and changes as indicated in the proposed amendment. So basically, what does that look like? You know, in terms of that, what's that contribution of the members' share? Tonight, just to be clear, there's no voting this evening. We're not voting on the budget. We're not voting on an amendment. We're not voting on anything. The only information, this is only for information and a Q&A or question and answer period. So we just want to kind of set the table for this evening. And then, you know, in terms of that, after we're finished in a bit, Madam Chair, if you don't mind me saying, we can remind that afterwards we'll come out of our published session and into a information session.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, Madam Chair, through you, I'll turn it over to Don.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to talk this evening a little bit about Regional Service Commission budgets. And how I'm going to focus on how they differ from municipal budgets. While there's a lot of similarity, there are certain differences that drive our process. And I guess the first way that they differ is the timing that we have to adhere to. We need to conclude our budget cycle in time to give our member communities costs that they can use in their budgets. So what that means is we start our budget exercise internally and as staff in late June and through the period of July. And what we do is we take the board's work plan and we look at what are the financial implications of that. The board's work plan this year is identified in the strategic plan and more specifically in the implementation guide. So we did put together a draft budget and met with the finance committee in July, took their direction and redid some things. And then the finance committee said, we're prepared to recommend this budget to the board. At that point in time, the budget belongs to the finance committee. Up until that time, it belonged to staff. It was staff's draft. We had ownership and care and feeding of it. But then it belongs to the finance committee. So at our September meeting each year, the finance committee recommends a budget to the board. They recommend that this budget be distributed to the member communities for review. So that's all that they do. We want you to think about this. If that passes, which it did this year, well, then the budget belongs to the board. It's a board's draft budget, and it's circulated to the communities for them to consider voting on at a future date. That future date has to be no less than 45 days from the time that the budget was distributed. So that's differs from a municipal budget, which can be voted on minutes after it's presented, or there could be a period of reflection. The reason that 45-day standstill period exists, if you will, is to give communities time to review the budget and determine how they're going to vote. They have an opportunity to look at it, think about it, meet with their councils. Different communities has different processes, and there's, one size doesn't fit all. And here inside the walls of the Regional Service Commission, we're not fully familiar with the 14 different processes that go on. So on that 45th day, the board votes on the budget, and it's not a majority of people sitting around the table. This budget in legislation requires a 2/3 majority of the directors at the table. And those directors voting in favor, that 2/3, they must represent at least 51% of the population of the communities that are represented at that meeting. So that's a difference. Back at the beginning of the Regional Service Commission, particularly as it relates to us in our experience, we had very clumsy and awkward budget presentations in the early years. Some of the directors were here then. Some of the directors listened to a finance chair say, I don't agree with the finance committee budget, and just on the spur of the moment, present 2 alternate budgets. And in subsequent years, we had directors, primarily from unincorporated areas, who didn't have to refer to councils, on the date of the budget vote, say, I move to amend this, I move to amend that. It put the directors for municipalities in a difficult situation. They had to make up a decision on the spot, on the spur of the moment. And so as we looked at that as an organization, we came up with and entrenched in our bylaws a requirement for prior written notice to be provided in the event that a community was going to make an amendment to the budget. So what that does is it gives our communities opportunities to consider the budget that the board directed be circulated. And it gives the communities an opportunity to consider the impact of the amendment offered. This year, we received prior written notice of an amendment. And I want to talk about the original budget, the amendment, what the budget will look like if the amendment carries. And I'm not supposing that the amendment will carry or won't carry. I want to cover all bases this evening. So typically, if you could kind of share the budget, the motion template. Thank you, Kelly. Environment and local government, particularly the finance group, are quite specific about the motion that the board must pass to indicate approval of the budget. And what we see on the screens is the standard wording. And so it says, the motion says that the board will approve the budget on an operating basis, and it quotes the total amount of revenue and expenses, and also the total for the capital budget. And then the caveat is, and that's as detailed in the meeting when it was presented to the board. So this year, that is the budget motion that would come to the board, that will come to the board on the 26th of October. And that motion will be made. And after that motion is made, an amendment will be offered. And so the amendment has to fit within the template that is provided to us by the finance people and environment and local government. So we received an amendment that told us what they wanted to happen. But it wasn't in this wording. So what we did is we developed and actually stole or used the wording from the amendment offered. And the amending motion will be offered by the city of Fredericton, and it will be moved to amend the previous motion, and it's in motion speak, if you will, to strike out this phrase and insert in its place, and there's a different amount. And the way we get to that different amount is we limit members' contribution, and here's the direct quote, to no more than the 2023 amounts plus CPI, and further inserting the discussion that happens tonight. I don't know if that's going to pass or not. I don't know that it's going to be seconded. But let's assume that it is seconded and it does pass. Well, that changes the motion that the board will be voting on. And this is what that motion will look like. It's the next screen.
Sorry.
There. If the amendment passes, this is the motion that the board will consider, that the board approve a total operating budget, 18,236,550. Expenditures the same, which limits the member contributions. It references the 2023 budget and the limits put on it, and that the capital budget will be 3,062,000, as detailed in the budget information session that we held on September the 7th, and again tonight on October the 3rd, and redistributed October the 4th. So tomorrow we're going to send out a budget that reflects the amendment being passed. That budget that we're sending out so that your communities can consider that. We're not suggesting the amendment. It's not our place to suggest that the amendment will pass or die. So that's the process that we're going to go through. That's the motions that we're going to ask for, that the chair will be asking for. And that kind of brings my talk here today to an end, and I'm about to pass the baton to Mary Kay to deal with the actual interplay between items. But before I do that, I think, Madam Chair, it's appropriate if any directors have questions of me on this part, I'd be happy to respond.
Okay, and I think to be fair, we will go around the table And if you could limit to one question first, and then we can come back and do a second question. So we'll start with you, Director Derek.
No question.
Okay,
Are we using the federal CPI or provincial,
We're using the provincial CPI.
which is substantially different? But I don't have another question, but I have a comment. We use the federal gas mileage in the summer for the provincial, correct?
You want me to
We
answer
have
that, Madam
motion
Chair?
here.
short, yes.
Yes, yes, we did.
So I'm wondering why we roll back to provincial for the CPI and not use federal. I think it makes more sense to use federal. That's all I have to say.
I have no response. to that.
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay, Director Powell,
No questions.
No, no questions.
okay, you good? Director Nardi, good, you good? Good,
If I understand correct, you said that it was 2/3 of the vote had to be, or 51% of the overall population, is that correct?
Madam Chair, it's not either or. The directors that sit at the table, we have 14, 2/3 of them must vote in favor of the budget. Those directors, the cumulative population of their communities needs to be 51% or more of the communities that are represented at that meeting.
Can I ask a question? What is the population of Fredericton versus the rest of the group? David, you know?
Mary Kay would have that information for you.
Even roughly would be fine.
67,625 is population part, and total population of the region is 137,500.
It's a little under half.
okay, anything further?
Would it be possible for that, can we put that portion of you explaining that out?
Madam Chair, I believe it is possible for us to click from the YouTube video. And if, yes, I've seen YouTube videos clicked. I believe we have the skill sets in-house, but if we don't, we'll go get them.
Okay. Okay, and no more questions, so now we will turn it over to Mary Kay.
Thank you,
Mary
Madam Chair.
Kay, please.
Please can bring up slides before I begin. So in order for us to adhere to the proposed amendment, just under 282,000 in expenses needed to be removed from the budget that was originally presented to the board and included by the solution back at our September meeting. So this slide summarizes the changes that need to be made to come up with that 282,000. So you'll recall when the budget was presented, tourism promotion and economic development, we had included a contingency in that amount because when 2023's budget was prepared, it was prepared for exactly the amount of the contract. And we're seeing that there are some additional costs that we're incurring. So we do anticipate that those two funds will have deficits in 2023. So when the original budget was drafted, we put in small contingencies in order to eliminate that possibility. So for purposes of the proposed amendment, those contingencies have been removed. The savings that would result as a result of removing those are 37,000 and 56,000 respectively. For public safety, 20,000 was removed from professional services to bring it in line to what the 2023 budget was. For sport, recreation, and cultural infrastructure, 55,000 was removed from professional services. That brought it in line with the 20,000 that was originally budgeted back in 2023. Community development, in the original budget, a second position was included. That's been eliminated based on the proposed amendment. That represents savings of approximately 88,000. And then for regional transportation, that was reduced by 46,000. And that's where we had to find additional money in order to to get it down to member contributions plus CPI. So that represented 46,000 in savings, and that's much less than what Urban World has given us for the vote to provide services in 2024. Next slide, Heather, thank you. So, as I mentioned, the budgeted expenses were reduced by $281,927. That represents a 1.5% decrease in our expenses. And what that does is that overall, the increase in member charges from 2023's member charges would be 97,162, as you'll see on the next slide. Whereas in the original budget, it was $379,085. So you're all familiar with how we have presented our new services charges. So this is the revised charges based on the proposed amendment. And I just want to point out, cooperative and regional planning is included in these new services. We've always included it as we did last year because it changed so much from when we were providing services before the new services came on. So we have our tourism promotion, economic development, cooperative and regional planning, community development, sport recreation, cultural infrastructure, regional transportation, public safety. You can't see this, but this is the total charges from 2023. This is the new proposed charges for 2024 based on the proposed amendment. So this last column is what each municipality would pay in an increase from 2023's proposed member charges. So the amendment that was brought forward said member charges should only increase by CPI. So when CPI is added to 2023's member charges, that gets an additional 97,000. So that's how that was worked out. So I'm not sure if you can all see those numbers, but I can go down through and read them for you, just so you have an idea. So Arcadia would pay an additional $583. Capital Region Rural District would be $87K. Central York, $4605, Fredericton, $54,054, Fredericton Junction, $416, Grand Lake, $2970, Anwell would be $5213, Harvey, $3561, Napa Millville, $2268, Nashua, $4850, New Maryland, $2810, Ormonto, $281. Sunbury North South, $6375, and Tracy, $466, for the total of $97,162. Any questions on that?
Do we want to go around the table again? We will go around in that way that you would have the chance to ask any questions from the start of this out. Dr. Kim? No? Yep. Dr. Marty? Okay. Good. Dr. Bob?
No, I'm good.
Good. And Dr. Derek?
Does this revised budget allow us to deliver on the mandate?
Do it.
I can do it if you like.
Sure.
It's either one.
Okay.
It does allow us to be active in our mandates. We will not be able to deliver the milestones that are included in the implementation schedule, so we'll have to do less. And you know, the significantly less than is in your strategic plan.
That answers your question. Does. Okay. That's it for the questions.
Madam Chairman. Mary Kay, I hope I'm not opening something here, but Mary Kay, one of the questions that came to me quite a bit was the allocation in the corporate service lines and the streams. Could you just explain that a little bit further, please?
Yeah, so corporate services has its own budget and it's the overhead of the company. So it's the expenses that benefit all the various divisions. So what we do is we calculate that budget, see what we're going to need, and then we look at what the drivers of those expenses are. So what fund is consuming most of, say, the board's time or most of John's time, and that's how we allocate accordingly. So all of those expenses are calculated line by line, and then we look at what the drivers are and we allocate them out to the various funds. Because it's revenue between that and corporate services. So we take a hard look at that every year to make sure that we're doing it in the most accurate way possible. This year was much different than what the allocation was in 2023. The reason is we do have almost a year under our belt, so we've got some experience of where we're focusing, what are our resources being put to, and we're attempting to charge those through the proper areas.
Thank you. Yes,
Would it be possible to get a copy of Mary Kay's presentation?
yes. Yeah, definitely. Yes,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would it also be possible to, get an indication of, not the changes in the monetary allowance, but the changes in our policy objectives under that budget? So typically, when the city of Fredericton is discussing, whether to make cuts or add money and so on and so forth, a bit of a menu is produced for council. Where the amounts of money, coincide with, activities that council might undertake. So that when we're going through a budget, if we're worried about affordability, we also have an understanding of what we're not doing next year in order to save that money. Because sometimes the value of not doing something, doesn't align perfectly with dollar value. Council needs to see what items we're not doing. Sometimes this helps pony up the courage to, go back to the taxpayers for more money, and sometimes it has the opposite effect, and we can rationalize through our strategic vision, putting something off, doing something between that delivers more value to it. And so this creates a better budget conversation, because of course, the most important part of budgets are not the numbers. They're the activities that it brings alive.
I would ask Dawn to answer it, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So we haven't done that exercise yet. The amendment is in our hands, relatively new. And so we have not had an opportunity to do that yet. Clock is ticking on us for September 26th. I think that we will not be able to do that in the kind of a specific way that a TJ would like, as we heard earlier. So, but we can have something general. The one thing that we do have, given that is different than a municipal budget, is we have an either or situation. We either have to go with this board will decide either to accept the original budget or the amended budget. So there's no trade-off to make between those two. It's one or the other. So, but I think that we could, within the next week to 10 days, in big picture bullets, no detail, sort of describe where we would come up short from the implementation guide that we have now.
Thank you. And just a correction, a friendly reminder that the CRSC, the budget, the special meeting will be held on Thursday, October 26th. You'll get plenty of notice. Okay, any further questions? Oh, sorry. Okay, yes.
It's a question I probably should understand the answer to, but when we talk about voting on the budget, so we know where the majority of the 51% is. So what takes place should there be a situation on the 26th that the budget amendment isn't accepted and the budget isn't accepted?
Madam Chair, in the event that a budget does not pass, we will need to develop an alternate budget based on input from the board. That would take some time. Although we've not as much time as it took to do this original budget because we have models in place. We would have to develop another budget based on the direction the board gives, run it through the finance committee, take it to the board. The board votes to distribute it. clock starts again for 45 days.
We're into January.
Yes. Admittedly, the legislation doesn't allow us to be particularly nimble with respect to our budget process.
Dr. Derek? No, okay. No further questions? Questions? Thank you, Mary Kay. That ends the budget. Question and answers. So now I need a motion to adjourn.
Bob Fowler, second it, Bob Fowler, Marco.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.